A confident woman does not arrive in the world fully formed, shining without effort or struggle. She is shaped carefully, quietly, and often through moments that tried to diminish her light. And yet she learns something powerful. Confidence is not something given to her by the world. It is something she claims from within it. She walks differently, not because the ground beneath her has changed, but because her belief in herself has. There is a stillness in her presence, a kind of grounded knowing that does not beg to be seen, yet cannot be ignored. She does not measure her worth by applause or acceptance, because she has learned that external voices are often loud, but not always true. In her daily life, she chooses habits that reflect dignity. She speaks to herself with the same respect she demands from others. She does not shrink to make others comfortable, nor does she expand for their approval. Instead, she remains centered, aware that her value is not negotiable. When life challenges her, she does not fall apart. She folds inward, gathers herself, and rises again with clearer vision. Even her silence carries meaning, not as weakness, but as strength refined by experience. She understands that not every battle requires noise, and not every opinion deserves her attention, and so she moves forward, not perfect, not untouched by struggle, but certain of her voice, certain of her path, certain that she is already enough, even as she continues to grow. Confidence is not inherited through bloodlines, nor is it gifted like an ornament placed at birth. It is a living process shaped through thought, repetition, and choice. Many assume some women are simply born confident, as though it is a trait reserved for a fortunate few. Yet confidence is more often constructed quietly in private moments when no one is watching, when doubt speaks loudly and stillness must answer. It is in those unseen exchanges that the foundation begins. It is reinforced every time she chooses to remain steady in the face of uncertainty, every time she refuses to let an old fear dictate a present decision. Confidence grows not in grand declarations, but in small acts of self-trust, repeated until they become a rhythm. A woman begins to understand that her thoughts are the soil in which her identity grows, and if those thoughts are left unattended, doubt will take root more quickly than courage. So she learns to tend to her inner world, replacing harsh self-judgment with patience, and hesitation with deliberate movement forward, even when clarity is incomplete. This confidence is also shaped by how she responds to setbacks, not as signs of failure, but as instructions that redirect her path. When something breaks, she does not immediately assume it reflects her inadequacy. Instead, she pauses and studies what the moment is revealing. There is a kind of intelligence in her resilience, a quiet refusal to collapse under the weight of temporary defeat. She allows herself to feel disappointment, but she does not let it settle into identity. Each experience becomes a reference point, a reminder that growth is rarely linear and often requires discomfort before clarity emerges. In this way, she learns that confidence is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to remain composed within it while still choosing to move forward. It is also visible in her habits, in the way she protects her time, her energy, and her attention from unnecessary noise. She understands that confidence is not only internal belief, but also external discipline. What she allows into her life shapes what grows within it. So she becomes selective, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for her own stability. She does not chase validation through constant explanation or overextension of herself. Instead, she practices restraint, choosing when to speak, when to act, and when to simply observe. This intentional way of living strengthens her sense of self until it becomes difficult for external pressure to easily distort her direction. Ultimately, confidence becomes less about what she shows to the world and more about what she no longer needs from it. It is a quiet agreement she makes with herself, a promise that she will not abandon her own voice for approval, nor trade her clarity for comfort. In time, this inner alignment begins to shape how she stands, how she speaks, how she chooses, until even her silence carries a sense of certainty that does not require explanation, but instead continues to unfold as she. A confident woman does not wait for permission to take up space in the world, because somewhere within her understanding she has accepted a truth many struggle to reach. Her existence is not conditional. She does not ask silently whether she is allowed to speak, to lead, to decide, or to simply be. Instead, she recognizes that her presence is already valid, already enough, and already deserving of acknowledgement without justification. This awareness does not come from arrogance, but from a steady inner alignment that has been shaped over time through experience, reflection, and the gradual release of unnecessary fear. She learns, often through moments of being overlooked or underestimated, that waiting for approval can become a form of self-erasure. So she begins to step out of that pattern. Not loudly at first, not always with certainty, but with intention. She speaks even when her voice trembles slightly. She shares her thoughts even when they are not immediately embraced. And she allows herself to occupy rooms without shrinking into the background. Each of these actions, though small on their own, becomes a declaration that she does not need external validation to justify her existence. This way of being is not about dominating spaces or demanding attention in excessive ways. It is about refusing invisibility. A confident woman understands that shrinking herself does not create comfort for others in a meaningful way. It only reinforces the idea that she must be smaller to be accepted. Instead, she chooses balance. She enters spaces with awareness, but not apology. She listens deeply, but she also contributes fully. She does not silence her ideas out of fear that they may be too much, too bold, or too different. Over time, she recognizes that her perspective has value, not because it is universally agreed upon, but because it is authentically hers. There is also a quiet discipline in how she carries herself. She does not over-explain her choices just to make others comfortable with them. She understands that not everyone will understand her direction, and she no longer sees that as a problem requiring correction. Instead, she remains grounded in her own reasoning. This grounding allows her to stand firm even when external opinions attempt to shift her sense of direction. She no longer measures her right to exist fully by the comfort level of those around her. In relationships, in workplaces, in social settings, she gradually removes the habit of seeking permission for basic self-expression. She speaks with clarity, not hesitation, and acts with intention, not apology. This does not mean she ignores respect or collaboration. Rather, she understands that mutual respect does not require self-diminishment. Her confidence grows stronger each time she chooses presence over invisibility, voice over silence, and authenticity over approval. She begins to realize that she was never meant to fit into reduced versions of herself just to be accepted. And as this understanding deepens, she continues to step forward with a presence that no longer asks to be allowed. A confident woman carries her habits like a quiet reflection of her inner respect for herself, not as a performance for others, but as a consistent way of honoring who she is becoming. Her actions are not random or dependent on mood alone. They are shaped by a deeper understanding that how she treats herself sets the tone for how the world responds to her. She does not build her daily life around seeking approval, because approval can shift and disappear. But self-respect, once cultivated, becomes a stable foundation that holds her steady even in uncertain environments. In her habits, there is discipline without harshness. She does not force herself into rigid patterns out of fear, but she does choose structure because she understands that direction requires intention. She wakes up and decides how she will speak to herself before the world has a chance to speak to her. That early internal dialogue becomes important because she knows that a mind fed with criticism will eventually reflect doubt in every action, while a mind guided by respect will naturally begin to move with more clarity and confidence. She becomes careful with what she consumes emotionally, mentally, and socially. She limits exposure to environments that constantly drain her sense of worth or encourage comparison. This is not avoidance, it is protection. She understands that self-respect includes guarding her energy, not allowing it to be scattered across spaces that do not recognize her value. In doing so, she builds habits that reinforce her stability, such as choosing rest when needed, instead of constant overexertion, choosing clarity over chaos, and choosing truth over comfort when the two are not aligned. Her self-respect is also visible in the way she speaks. She does not belittle herself through language, even in moments of imperfection. She avoids the habit of apologizing for simply existing in space or expressing her thoughts. When she makes mistakes, she acknowledges them without turning them into definitions of her identity. This balance allows her to remain accountable without becoming self-destructive in thought. She understands that growth requires honesty, but not self-punishment. In relationships, she does not overextend herself to earn acceptance. She gives, but not at the cost of her own depletion. She listens, but does not abandon her own voice in the process. She learns to recognize when effort becomes imbalanced, and instead of ignoring it, she adjusts her behavior to restore fairness within herself. This habit of self-correction is not driven by ego, but by respect for her own emotional boundaries. Even in solitude, her habits reflect care. She chooses environments that support her mental peace, whether that is through rest, reflection, learning, or simply being still without guilt. She does not equate constant productivity with worth. Instead, she understands that rest is also part of discipline when it preserves clarity and strength. Through all of this, her habits become a language of self-respect, spoken not loudly but consistently, shaping how she moves through her days with quiet dignity that does not need external validation to remain steady. A confident woman understands that silence is never empty. It is often full of meaning, reflection, and unseen strength. She does not rush to fill every pause with explanation, nor does she confuse quietness with weakness, because she has learned that silence can be a form of control over her inner world. In moments of conflict, she often steps back not to disappear, but to observe, to gather clarity before response, knowing that reaction without thought can scatter her energy and weaken her direction. Her silence becomes a space where she can hear herself more clearly, separate emotion from truth, and choose responses that align with her deeper understanding rather than temporary emotion. Instead of reacting to every slight or misunderstanding, she learns to let silence do the work of preserving her dignity while time reveals what words cannot fix. Setbacks in her life are no longer endings. They are turning points that redirect her attention toward lessons she might have otherwise ignored. She begins to see failure not as proof of inadequacy, but as information, something to be studied rather than feared, something that sharpens rather than diminishes her resolve. In this way, setbacks lose their power to define her and instead become guides that point her towards stronger decisions and clearer awareness of her path. There is a quiet resilience in how she absorbs difficulty, not by denying pain, but by refusing to let pain become permanent. She allows experiences to pass through her like weather, acknowledging their presence without letting them settle into identity. Even in stillness, she is not stagnant. She's processing, rebuilding, and quietly choosing her next direction. This transformation of silence into strength and setbacks into direction becomes the unseen architecture of her confidence. Over time, she begins to understand that silence is not absence, but presence refined, and setbacks are not detours, but invitations to evolve into a more grounded version of herself that no longer depends on external validation to feel complete. And in this understanding, she moves through life with a steadiness that to transform be easily disrupted, into a learn to sit with uncertainty without losing herself to it, and to a quiet form of instruction that shapes her thinking, her choices into and her perception of what is possible as she continues forward into spaces where she no longer asks whether she belongs, but instead recognizes her belonging as something inherent within her own awareness. And the more she practices this way of being, the more her confidence stops being something she performs and becomes something she inhabits naturally without effort or explanation, as if it has always been part of her internal landscape, guiding her steps, even when the path ahead is unclear, and reminding that every silence she once feared, still only now beginning to fully understand, but still unfolding within her awareness, as she continues to listen beyond what was once silent. A confident woman moves through life with an inner certainty that does not depend on constant reassurance from the outside world. This certainty is not loud or forceful. It is steady, like something deeply rooted that does not shake easily when circumstances shift. She does not build her identity on shifting opinions, because she has learned that external validation is temporary often inconsistent and sometimes misleading. Instead, she turns inward to a sense of knowing that grows stronger each time she chooses herself over doubt. Her confidence is not about believing she is always right, but about trusting that she can face whatever comes, adjust when necessary, and still remain intact in her sense of self. This creates a kind of calm within her decisions, because she is no longer constantly negotiating her worth with the approval of others. She listens to advice. She considers perspectives, but she does not allow them to override her inner direction without reflection. There is a difference between openness and dependence, and she learns to stand in that difference with clarity. When she acts, she does so with intention rather than approval seeking, understanding that not every choice will be universally understood, and that is not a reason to abandon it. This allows her to move forward even when the path is uncertain, because she is guided by internal alignment rather than external applause. In moments of doubt, she does not collapse into hesitation for long periods, because she has trained herself to return to her inner voice rather than remain trapped in external noise. She recognizes that waiting for complete certainty from the world is often a delay of her own growth, so she learns to proceed with enough understanding, trusting herself to refine the rest along the way. This is how her certainty becomes practical, not theoretical, something lived through daily choices rather than imagined ideals. Even when she makes mistakes, her inner certainty prevents her from falling into self-abandonment, because she understands that error is part of movement, not a reason to stop moving. She corrects her direction without questioning her entire worth, which allows her to grow without losing her foundation. Over time, this way of living shapes her presence. She no longer seeks to prove she belongs, because she already feels anchored within herself. This anchoring gives her a quiet authority in how she speaks, how she acts, and how she responds to challenges, because she is no longer fragmented by the need to be constantly affirmed. Instead of asking the world who she is, she begins to express it through consistency, clarity, and presence that does not shift easily with external opinion. And in this steady alignment between who she is and how she moves, she continues forward with a sense of certainty that remains present within her choices, as she lives each moment guided by an inner compass that keeps her grounded even when everything around her is uncertain.